Crime and Crime Again is a true crime podcast containing subject matter that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. This episode discusses topics that may be triggering, such as domestic violence. Please take care while listening. Crown Point, New Mexico sits in the northwestern region of the state, situated in Navajo Nation. Pepita Redhair was born in Gallup, New Mexico, but was raised in Crown Point. Born on August 4th, 1992 to her mother Anita, Pepita was always outgoing and fun-loving. She loved cooking, and her biggest hobby was skateboarding. Pepita knew how to make people laugh, and she had a warm and sincere personality. Pepita graduated from Crown Point High School, and she had always wanted to find a career that would take her beyond the city limits of her hometown. She ended up moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 2 hours away from her hometown of Crown Point. Despite the commute, Pepita regularly traveled back home to Crown Point to visit with her mother and siblings. She and her mother were always incredibly close, and if they weren't physically together, not a day went by where they didn't text or call each other. Pepita attended Navajo Technical College for 2 semesters. At the time, she was considering becoming a teacher, and Pepita did have dreams of continuing her education at another college. Sometime in 2016, Pepita met a man named Nicholas, who, like her, is Navajo. According to Pepita's sister, Shelda, their relationship started off happily. They were affectionate and playful with each other, always cracking jokes and having fun. Just a few months into their relationship, Pepita moved into a home in Albuquerque with Nick and his parents. It didn't take long before Pepita started asking her sister Shelda about the traditions surrounding Navajo weddings. Though they weren't formally engaged, Pepita did confide to her family that she and Nick had already started thinking about marriage. For a while, all seemed well with Pepita and Nick's relationship, but there came a day when Pepita confessed to her mother that everything was not as it seemed. The relationship had turned abusive. One of Pepita's confessions to her mother detailed an argument between her and a drunken Nick, which ended in Nick striking Pepita and leaving her with bruises. It's unclear exactly how many instances of abuse Pepita suffered, but we do know that on February 6, 2020, Albuquerque police were called to the home where Pepita lived with Nick for a domestic disturbance. And that was not the first time police were called to the home for a domestic dispute. Just 4 days later, on February 10, 2020, Pepita was hospitalized. Records indicated that she was seen at the hospital as an assault victim. And again, that was not the first time that Pepita was hospitalized under suspicious circumstances. In March 2020, just weeks after Pepita was put in the hospital as a result of abuse at the hands of her boyfriend, Pepita decided to move back home with her mother in Crown Point. When she arrived at her mother's house, she had a bruised eye and a swollen lip. Unfortunately, the arrangement didn't last long. Pepita soon decided that she wanted to go back to Albuquerque to be with Nick. Fighting with every fiber of her being not to turn the car around and take her daughter back home, Anita drove Pepita the 2 hours back to Albuquerque, because Pepita was 27 years old and her decisions could not be made for her. If her mother did not drive her back, she would have found her own way to reach her destination. Anita dropped Pepita off at Nick's house early in the morning on March 24, 2020. That was the last time she ever saw her daughter. The next day, March 25th, Anita texted Pepita as usual, asking how she was doing. They talked on the phone and or texted every single day, so Anita expected to receive a response within minutes. But the response didn't come. By March 27th, 2020, Anita still had not received any response from Pepita. She had texted and called her multiple times, but all of her attempts to contact her daughter went unheard and unseen. At that point, Anita called and texted Nick, asking him to respond to her and let her know where Pepita was. But Nick's only response was that he didn't know where she was, and that she had, quote-unquote, just left. Anita believed that something was very wrong and that her daughter was in danger. She contacted the Albuquerque Police Department and filed a missing person report for Pepita on March 27, 2020. Despite being able to file the report, Anita was met with the same indifference that so many Indigenous families face when their loved ones go missing or are murdered. She was told by detectives with the Albuquerque Police Department that Pepita was an adult and that she could go missing if she wanted to. They suggested that Pepita was likely just visiting a friend and would turn up within a couple of weeks. To put it simply, the Albuquerque Police Department had no intentions of searching for Pepita Redhair or properly investigating her disappearance. APD never searched Nick's home or property, and according to Sean Griswold, an Indigenous reporter with Source New Mexico, Nick was only interviewed on one occasion about Pepita's disappearance. Pepita's family reached out to the tribal police of Navajo Nation, hoping that they would find more help and more empathy there. But because Pepita disappeared from Albuquerque, tribal police did not have jurisdiction over her case. Unfortunately, Pepita Redhair's disappearance fell in the midst of unprecedented societal chaos. By the time Pepita was reported missing on March 27, 2020, New Mexico had just experienced its first death related to COVID-19. A stay-at-home order had already been issued for the entire state. Non-essential businesses, such as retail stores, malls, and movie theaters, had been ordered to close completely, and restaurants were restricted to takeout and delivery only. The day that Pepita was officially reported missing was the same day that schools in New Mexico were closed and ordered to transition to remote learning. The havoc that COVID-19 was wreaking on society extended to the justice system. Courthouses closed, jails and prisons were facing rapid spread of the virus and serious illness among inmates, and police departments were forced to halt a huge portion of their operations. Not to mention, fewer officers were fit for duty due to catching COVID. COVID-19 certainly had a significant and likely devastating impact on the most critical days of the investigation into Pepita's disappearance. Not only were Pepita's loved ones facing systemic discrimination from law enforcement that has impacted Indigenous families since long before the threat of a pandemic loomed over the entire world, but that pandemic chipped away at what few resources Pepita's family had only hoped to have at their disposal. There was one resource that Shelda believed might be their best chance of spreading the word and putting Pepita's name and face into people's minds. While everyone was ordered to stay home unless it was absolutely necessary for them to leave, people were watching the news, holding their breath as they watched COVID-19's global death toll rise. And maybe, just maybe, local media would be willing to give Pepita's case just a few minutes of airtime. So Shelda reached out to local news outlets, asking if they would be willing to broadcast Pepita's image and some basic information regarding her disappearance. But every station that Shelda reached out to ignored her. They would have to fight for Pepita entirely on their own. Pepita's family started making as many missing person posters as they could and hanging them up around Albuquerque, particularly in areas that Pepita frequented, such as the bus station. At one point, Shelda actually drove to Nick's house, hoping that Pepita would be there. When she arrived, she shouted Pepita's name and even pleaded with Nick to come outside and talk to her. She even noticed someone pull back the curtains in a window and look directly at her, before closing the curtain and walking away. Whoever was in the house that day completely ignored Shelda and very clearly did not want to speak about Pepita. On March 30th, 2020, 3 days after Pepita was reported missing, Anita finally received a text back from Pepita's phone. But it wasn't Pepita. The person texted Anita back to inform her that they were homeless and that they had actually purchased the phone from someone. According to that person, they had no idea who Pepita was and had not seen her. On April 19, 2020, nearly a month after Pepita disappeared, Nick decided to file his own missing person report with Albuquerque Police. In the report, Nick stated that on the night of March 26, 2020, he and Pepita were out drinking and met up with another man. They later got into an argument after returning home, and she left the home on foot around 11 p.m. Nick also claimed that sometime after Pepita left the house, he received a text from her phone stating that she was with a man named Laramie. That was the first time that anyone in Pepita's family had ever heard of a man named Laramie. Without any knowledge as to who the man was or how he knew Pepita, Anita posted about the mysterious Laramie on Facebook, hoping that someone would have information. In early July 2020, 4 months after Pepita disappeared, Laramie himself reached out to Anita to attempt to clear the air. Laramie told Anita that he did know Pepita, but that she had not been with him the night she allegedly left her house. In fact, Laramie informed Anita that the last time he had seen Pepita was on March 10, 2020, 2 weeks before her disappearance. Laramie was celebrating his birthday, and Pepita had bought him a cupcake. This was notable to Laramie because, according to him, Nick became jealous that Pepita had bought Laramie a cupcake and sang happy birthday to him. Pepita and Nick began arguing, and Laramie claimed to have witnessed Nick hitting Pepita. After that, they left, and Laramie hadn't seen Pepita since. There is no indication that Albuquerque police attempted to identify or locate Laramie after he was named in Nick's report. And unfortunately, any other information that Laramie might have will forever remain a mystery, because he is now deceased. On May 20th, 2020, Anita received a phone call from what sounded like a young woman, telling her that she had seen Pepita, quote-unquote, at City Park, before abruptly hanging up. The caller gave no further details about the location. Shelda immediately jumped to investigate the tip. She visited several local parks in Albuquerque, searching for Pepita and asking people if they had seen anyone matching Pepita's description. But this search led nowhere. Shelda then Googled the word City Park to see if there were any locations that popped up that she hadn't visited yet. One location in particular stood out to her. A building on Google Maps was labeled, quote-unquote, City Park, but it did not appear to be a park at all. Shelda drove to the location and discovered that, oddly, it was actually a hotel. The hotel's location on Google Maps gave no indication to Shelda that it was a hotel at all. There was no hotel name on Google Maps, only the label City Park right on top of the building. When Shelda arrived at the hotel, she immediately noticed a man sitting on a bicycle near a tree by the hotel parking lot. Oddly, he was holding a walkie-talkie. It appeared as though he was watching the entrance to the hotel, keeping track of everyone who arrived and everyone who left. She noticed another man nearby, next to a dumpster at the back of the parking lot, also sitting on a bicycle and holding a walkie-talkie. A third man sat on a bicycle holding a walkie-talkie in another area of the parking lot. And possibly the strangest observation that Shelda made was multiple windowless vans lined up at the back of the parking lot, each with a different out-of-state license plate. All of this made the hairs on Shelda's neck stand on end. Something about the hotel and its occupants was unsettling. Too disturbed to go into the hotel and ask questions about Pepita, Shelda drove away. At the end of May 2020, Anita and Shelda received another tip from someone claiming to have seen Pepita in Albuquerque. When Shelda investigated, she actually found the woman that the tipster believed to be Pepita. In an interview with Investigation Discovery's Disappeared, Shelda said that the woman was nearly a spitting image of Pepita. It was then that Shelda realized that that woman was the person who was spotted on numerous occasions in different areas of the city, and that tipsters believed that she was Pepita because she looked so much like her. Pepita's boyfriend Nick has never been named as a suspect in her disappearance by the Albuquerque Police Department. More than 4 years have passed since Pepita disappeared. COVID-19 has long since stopped dominating the headlines, And yet, Pepita's name and face have not been given the space in media that she deserves. Pepita Redhair's disappearance fell through the cracks left by decades, centuries of systemic racism against Indigenous people. It's impossible not to wonder, even under the shadow of a pandemic, how differently the investigation might have turned out if Pepita was white, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, in the About Me section of an upper-middle-class girl next door. All victims of domestic violence, all victims of abduction, all victims of homicide deserve to have their stories told, and to be granted the diligence and integrity of a proper investigation into the tragedy that befell them. But we have to acknowledge the glaring biases and inequities that silence the voices of Indigenous, Black, and Latinx people. It is not acceptable to feign ignorance to the issue, nor to minimize the presence of the issue altogether when people of color are victims of violence. Pepita Redhair was failed by law enforcement and by the media. We must do better. Pepita Redhair was 27 years old when she disappeared on March 27, 2020 from Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was last seen at the home that she lived in with her boyfriend and his parents. Pepita has 2 birthmarks below her bottom lip on her chin. She has several tattoos: a dinosaur on her right forearm, a koi fish on her left forearm, a butterfly on her shoulder, a sunshine tattoo on her right inner ankle, and her last name, Redhair, in an unknown location. Pepita is Navajo. She has black hair and dark brown eyes. Today, Pepita would be 32 years old. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Pepita Redhair, please contact the Albuquerque Police Department at 505-242-2677. If you'd like to request a case to be covered on the show, you'll find a link to a case request form in the show notes. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, where you'll find full episodes, complete with photos relevant to each case. You can follow the podcast on X, formerly Twitter, at CrimeAgainPod, on Instagram at CrimeAgainPodcast, and on TikTok at CrimeAgainPodcast. Links to all social media can be found in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.